Wheatley. Maria Wheatley is one of my trainers in past life regressions, and I think I'm so lucky to have her as my trainer at the time. She's a second generation Dowser. She's a leading authority in the geopathic systems and earth energies. She's second generation Dowser. Her father was Dennis Wheatley, who was considered one of the top 5 master Dowsers. She's an accomplished author. She's runs many workshops, running them currently at the moment, and has got some wonderful ones that we will be hearing about in the future. And also as well, she does tours, and she's also got Esoteric College as well. So you can also take training courses from her. And she's very popular in America and running some courses out there. So I hope that's all right. And I've got that information correct, Maria. Thank you so much for being here. And do get your conversations in. So please, when you start coming in, rolling in, say hi. We've got chat up in the corner so that people can put your comments in. Do get your comments in. And thank you for those who are here at the moment. I can see the numbers are beginning to start at the moment. And I must say hello to Patricia. Thank you for joining us tonight, Patricia. So, Maria, I'm going to mention your new book, The Secret History of Stonehenge. Really excited about that one. And we're going on to your book launch. So do say about that as well. But I just wanted to have a bit of an introduction at the beginning. Your father being a master Dowser, you travelled the world with him. Can you just say about the first influences with him and when it was that you started to really get the passion for dowsing and these wonderful ancient sites and the ancient Neolithic and the history that goes with that?
As an adult, it's amazing to go into the areas of places like Stonehenge because the stones tower above you even as an adult. But going in there as a very small child, they seem to be 10 times taller. So I got a real passion for ancient sites and the earth energies there I was brought up with. There's 49 different types of earth energies, and intriguingly are feminine because they come from Gaia and Gaia alone, or they are influenced by the sun and celestial movements besides. So from a very early age I just fell in love with sites in France, Brittany I went to, and Scotland as well. We went to look for the Loch Ness Monster. Didn't see the Loch Ness Monster, but we went nonetheless. So yeah, from a very early age, it was just a passion. And then I started to ask questions like, who built them? When were they built? And why were they built? Those age-old questions that people have been asking for centuries. And it led me to some, very interesting discoveries in the ancient landscape. And I've always questioned as well, the kind of the narrative, the archaeological narrative. Even though I've studied at Oxford with Lisa Brown, you get a lot of support from my tutors there. But yes, it's been a wonderful journey, and it's like any journey you go on, Paul. It never stops, and the more that you find out, the more questions that arise anyway.
I love questions, and I think that wouldn't it be boring if we knew everything. I must say hello to Kerry, Anna and Cowabunga. Thank you for watching. Do get your questions in as well. But I want to go just to your early stage because I heard that with your father, he was very lucky to have some unpublished manuscripts of Guy Underwood and Tom Lethbridge. If you can explain a little bit about those and new interesting information that isn't out there that everybody knows about because of the published books and papers that they've done.
Yes, I mean, my late father was permitted to have all of the unpublished surveys of two master dowsers, mostly Guy Underwood, and he did surveys all across the world, not just around places like Stonehenge and Avebury and Silbury Hill, but places in Malta that I ended up taking people to and experiencing the energies there. And Tom Lethbridge was a master of pendulum dowsing, not like how pendulum dowsing is done today. He did it in a very different way. He was from no, he wasn't. He was from Cambridge University, rather, and he was a very experienced archaeologist that ended up doing a very interesting pendulum dowsing system. So I also inherited his his stuff as well. And I got taught how to dowse for these very sensitive earth energies, which takes us far, far beyond just ley lines and just earth currents. It takes us into a domain of quite sacred patterns that the earth admits.
That's great. And I'd like to pick more on that ley lines, because I think when I was a lot younger and getting into this field, it was all about ley lines. You weren't really talked about the geospirals, or the Curry grid is another one you mentioned. If you can just mention some of the top few other, apart from ley lines, that you can pick up energy wise.
Absolutely. I mean, also, just before I do that, ley is a generic term. You get astronomical leys, you get topographical leys, you get energy leys. So it's like one word is a lot of different types. But if we move on from the ley, and you imagine that deep down in the earth, you have large lakes and aquifers, and sometimes they're under pressure from rocks each side, they start to emit a geospiral energy pattern. Now, if a ley goes through that, or an earth current goes through a geospiral, it can sometimes veer off its course because it's that strong. It's like a vortex motion, because if you imagine a spiral going round and round and round, and then it turns with the phases of the moon in the other direction, it is very, very strong. And that's what the ancients were looking for first. The leys connect sites to one another, but it's the earth energies that they were definitely looking for. And we know this is because every design that you go, whether it's the pyramids of ancient Egypt, the Hypogeum of Malta, or Stonehenge or Avebury, is always the geospiral pattern that features at the center of these sites. It's the holiest of holies and the esoteric center.
Thank you. Mark, hello to you. Hello, Tinker. Hello, Amanda. I was going to go on to Stonehenge to begin with, because that's your book. But there was something really, now you mentioned geospirals, and something I wanted to say. You have done experiments and also looked into research with growing plants and seeds and crops using geospirals. That would be interesting to know a little more about, please.
Absolutely. Back in the 1990s, you had an author called John Burke who wrote a seminal book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, which I read, and my late father met John Burke. And I always felt that he was right, but for the wrong reason. And what I felt was, he used to go to an ancient site, put seeds in the ancient site, take them back to his laboratory and grow them. And they grew twice as fast, twice as strong. But I knew it was the earth energy pattern. If you placed it on the earth energy pattern, that will charge the seed. So if you place it on a geospiral and some other different types of earth energies besides, but if you do place it on that, a particular phase of the moon, the geospiral turns its rotation 6 days after a new or full moon, and it's still active around the 7th day, which is first and last quarter of the moon phase. And then I realized, when I was studying at Oxford, for example, that all of the Bronze Age farmers were doing exactly the same thing in different parts of the British Isles. They were following a template. And when I looked into that template on the Salisbury Plain in Oxfordshire and dowsed it and looked at my legacy archives, I realized that they were not only charging the seed, they knew where to plant it. And if you planted it in the right place above certain earth energies that they carved out in the land, and you avoided certain earth energies as well, like underground water called groundwater by the water board, it stunts growth. Also, we mentioned leys earlier. There was an agricultural scientist who did his own experiments in the 80s. I think, it was in the 1980s, where he was looking about growing seeds on leys, and he found they stunted growth. It's very rare that plants grow well on leys. Why? It's a straight line, and energy travels too fast on a straight line. The Chinese called it qi. You can call it what you will. You can just call it energy, and it travels really fast along a straight line, and so it can stunt growth. And that's why the Chinese, they always had bowed roofs, because they don't want the qi to travel too fast. Anything with a curve slows the flow of qi down. So that's why the ancients were avoiding lays. They're for the sacred sites. They weren't necessarily for planting. So I tested the whole system out, and other people were helping as well. So it's not a biased report, which it could often be. And we found that, yes, they grew twice as fast. But it was a hot summer, if you remember, in 2020, just after the lockdown. And it was a really hot summer. So I thought, what if I start withdrawing water from the seedlings that were growing? And they were growing straight. I've got photographs of them. I've got the proof with a ruler by each one, the control sample and the charged sample. What if I withdrew the water and they still grew stronger? And they took longer to wilt and longer to, in effect, have their life force drained. And this is what I think we can learn today. If we planted in harmony with Gaia, if we live in harmony with Gaia, I think we will get wiser and stronger physically as well, just like the ancients were. They didn't die young, as archaeologists would have you. If you look to the actual reports from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, they were living a ripe old age. Why? They had organic food, organic water, no electromagnetic smog to worry about. They had a healthy environment.
Hello, Jodie. I'd just like to say thank you for joining us. And before I move on to the next question, Patricia said, geospars, are they same as Dragon Earth energy?
No, there's a big difference. The Chinese would have called them more like the coil of the dragon. No, a geospiral is the harmonic surface pattern of very deep water that is kind of under pressure, and it makes a spiral pattern. It's not like an earth current. It's not like a dragon energy. Think of it as about being very feminine, because it's one of the most feminine earth energy patterns that you will have. And we've measured its Hertzian field. It's better than earth currents, for example, and it will bring your brain into alpha mode as well, around about sort of 7 to 10 hertz on average. I mean, it can go higher and it can go lower. So it kind of brings you into that kind of meditative state. So just by going to a stone circle, you will benefit from the energies. It will calm you down. And do you know what? Professor Tim DeVille, he's got a fantastic project going. I think it's at Bournemouth University, where it's called Henge. And that's where he takes people with emotional issues or mental health problems, and we've all had those from time to time and can sympathize with people that have ongoing issues, put them into a Henge made by humans like Stonehenge or Silbury Hill or West Kennet Longbarrow. And he found, with measuring their brain waves, which I had done decades preceding him, yes, it makes them calmer. But again, I said to Tim DeVille, I'm going to take it one stage further. It's not just going into that ancient site, it's the earth energies that you are standing above. He nodded politely and walked away.
I mean, these questions are kind of going a bit out of order to what I had planned, but that's what happens when you do these interviews. But that sort of brings me on with the earth energy, as you mentioned, underground water and the sounds produced by underground water, and also as well, you go into your new book about the earth sounds and earth vibrations and earth frequencies. Going into that now would be fascinating, please.
Okay, well, yes, if we visualize the fact that when we've all heard of Pythagoras, I don't understand his maths, but we've all heard of Pythagoras.
I don't either.
and Pythagoras and later Kepler, they were into what's called the music of the spheres. And the music of the spheres, imagine that one planetary orbit might make a mathematical relationship to another that equates to music. And they called it the music of the spheres. And legend has it that Pythagoras could hear the music of the spheres. Kepler, on the other hand, said that the soul can hear that music? Well, what I discovered in concentric circle energy patterns that are earth energy, because it's not always linear and it's not always like a dragon line or a dragon meandering current. Sometimes it emits massive circles, and these circles, just like the music of the spheres, I discovered equated to musical harmonics. So if you know where to stand in Stonehenge, okay, and I'm going to tell you where you can stand in Stonehenge to experience this, in between the blue stone circle and the sarsen linteled outer stone circle is a very special place. It equates to a mathematical equation called 5/4, which means nothing to any of us, not really. But what that does in musical terms is called the major third. And even in Christian and Gothic cathedrals throughout medieval times, right up until modern times, like Beethoven and Bach and all the great composers, the major third can lift your emotions. It can lift your consciousness. So they knew that that style of music can literally lift you higher. And at Stonehenge, that's being emitted by the earth coming up. But instead of being the circles in the heavens, it's the circles below the ground coming up with Gaia's energy. And I call that Gaia's music, or the music of the earth, because it's identical to what Pythagoras and Kepler had previously discovered, obviously, you know, thousands of years preceding that. So if we think of music as being healing, and different tones can do different things to our bodies, to our consciousness, then that's earth energy. It's music.
I must say hello to Karen, who's just joined us. I'm going to read out these questions as well. So, even visualizing touching ancient stones during meditation by people who have never actually touched such stones brings peace. What are some of your, and I get the next questions up here as well, what are some of your experiences with people that are on your tours? And it's not just Stonehenge, although I will come on to mention more about Stonehenge later, but some of the magical powers, maybe people are never expected to experience or feel anything before. What kind of the sort of things that people have said to you on your wonderful tours?
What they've said and experience, and their own, everybody's experience is unique, but there can be a collective experience of peace and a sense of wisdom. And at Stonehenge, especially, downloads, like you get in the King's Chamber, you can often get a download of any subject, of any matter. So people have experienced downloads with me that have been quite life-changing, and they have experienced a sense of harmony. And also, I mean, as you know, Paul and I are both into past life regression. And with going around places like with Dolores Cannon as well, I was her guide for many, many years. Then I realized it can release past life memories when you stand in these very sensitive zones as well. So we can understand the past, the present, and I believe the future as well. I think we can, you know, make our energies flow easier for future outcomes at these places, especially on those sacred days of the year, like the summer solstice. Somebody's written here, I stood in the middle years back on the summer solstice, a night and morning we'll never forget. Exactly. These are the times of the year when the veil is thin at places like Beltane and Imbolc. And same with the lunar cycle. We are coming up to the most sensitive lunar cycle that only occurs every 18.61 years. The summer solstice happens every year. It's an annual event, obviously. But coming up soon, and Avebury will be activated back in, oh my God, 2004, 2005, oh, a long, long time ago. I discovered one of the lunar alignments at Avebury pointing to what's called the moon's most northerly moonrise, and it's called the night of the high moon. If you imagine that at the summer solstice, it's the longest day, isn't it, of daylight. The night of the high moon is the longest night of moonlight. And it's when at Avebury and other sites beside, the stones point and are aligned to that alignment, and they become really and truly amazingly activated. And I felt that cycle before, so I'm not a newbie this time round. And it's becoming into its activation now, but it will be especially active next year. So that's something to look out for. And I'll be doing things at Avebury for the night of the high moon.
That sounds an amazing event, and I'm just going to have to put these all these wonderful dates down in my diary. Cowabunga said, "I love to experience the major third."
Wow.
Well, we get this one up. Yes, absolutely. Sacred ground for me. I'm just going to see. I think this is an observation. Hi, we're looking through the chat and relates to what you say about thinking about touching the stones. I think I can even smell the scent of stones, wood, etc., without even being there. I love Stonehenge. Sad day today. We're bringing up that they've passed the tunnel to go underneath, but all hope is not lost. There's still opposition against that. But I think what people don't think about going to, and I've been lucky to go along there with you, is Woodhenge is such a wonderful, peaceful, sacred place to go to, and for free as well. So you don't have all the tourist side of things whilst you're going around Woodhenge. And Stonehenge, there has been mistakenly post holes found and they've put them down to being totem poles. If you can say about the totem poles, which still today people have mislabeled them.
Yes, I mean, when we think of a totem pole, we do think of, just a pole in the ground. And when we go back thousands of years before even phase one of Stonehenge was born, so we're going back to what's called the Mesolithic period, the Middle Stone Age, round about 8,000, 9,000 years ago, just to get a timeline going. And the ancients put 3 posts in a line to the equinox. That's around about March the 21st and September the 23rd on average. And so they were aligned to that particular sunrise. But more than that, at the center of Stonehenge, what would become the center of the megalithic Stonehenge, there was random posts and buildings and structures. Now, when I looked into the archaeological reports and other reports besides, they started to be more like rectangular buildings. So I think the very, very first phase of Stonehenge were timber temples that were placed inside. And what was the start of Avebury? A timber temple. It wasn't always stone. So Avebury's heart, which is the southern inner circle that has the obelisk marker stone marking its esoteric center, long before that, the people, and I discovered what they look like, that found that geospiral, they placed a rectangular building on that. That's why you had a huge stone placed above that building, and then it was outlined in smaller stones. That's what was happening there. It's called a longhouse in archaeological terms. And we've got somebody saying here, Karen, I found Woodhenge very peaceful, very different to Stonehenge. I agree. I agree totally. And what I noticed about Woodhenge is that it's got 6 concentric circles. It's outline that was discovered by Maud Cunnington in 1925. A woman found that. She was one of the early female archaeologists. Well done, Maud. And those circles, again, produce musical harmonics. But this time, one of your wonderful listeners has said they, feel the major third is very relaxing. This was the perfect fourth that some musicians say is very good for the female vocal voice. It can be a little bit higher. So what I envision at Woodhenge, for example, going back in the day, is that if you walk it in a particular manner, because what most people do when they go to Stonehenge, and I'm including myself in this as well, we tend to go to the center of the site. Yeah, we you kind of go in that way. But if you do that, you only experience a small part of Woodhenge, not all of the energies. So then I realized, well, what if you could do it in a labyrinth walk? And if you do it in a labyrinth walk, then you get a mathematical harmonic. It's called a 2.5 labyrinth. Most labyrinths are about 7 coils, like turns, if you see what I mean. That's what I mean. But this one is 2.5, which is the perfect fourth. So if you walk it in as a labyrinth, which I point out in the book, you are in harmony with all of its musical harmonics as well. And I think that was led by the priestesshood there.
Patricia says, is there an energy spiral under Glastonbury tour?
That's a really good question, Patricia, because yes. What we've got at Glastonbury is it's been designed many millennia ago as being like a kind of maze look to it, with its different levels going up, which is 7 coils. And intriguingly, the geospiral in one of its energy system is in 7s, and it goes up 7, 14, 21, right up to 49. So beneath Glastonbury Tor, you have that 7 coil geospiral, and that's why it's got a 7 kind of coil going around it. I think the ancients were fully aware of the dynamics of the number 7 to do with the geospiral.
Absolutely. Moving to Stonehenge, which I kind of that was going to be mainly my focus today, but do get questions, whatever you want them to be, is wonderful. But they hid some stones because it didn't fit in with the model of what they were finding, and that was not something that I knew about until conversations with you and reading your book. Why was that done?
It's very intriguing, Stonehenge, because we all think we know what it looks like, because we were told by William Stukeley in 1725 what it looked like. We were told by John Aubrey in 1666 what Stonehenge looked like, both of whom were Masons. Now, when we look to buried artifacts at Stonehenge, then there is a large stone setting that was there. It wasn't recorded by Stukeley because he didn't know where it went. And it was buried probably in around 1930 to keep it out of sight. It's a massive trilithon. Okay. Now that could have stood inside of the stone circle opposite the great trilithon, because everything at Stonehenge is symmetry, or the trilithons stand opposite each other. So it could have been inside of Stonehenge, or it could have been outside of Stonehenge. So anything that didn't fit the model, it was just buried beneath the ground. And I find that quite frustrating, that you can't ask for excavation. You can't ask for excavation because it's UNESCO World Heritage Site. Well, it might not be soon with the tunnel, because UNESCO are saying they're going to pull the carpet beneath us. Then there could be an excavation, but whether they would want to raise that. In my book, I actually show you where it is. I've got an arrow pointing to where the missing trilithon is, the buried trilithon. Back in 1624, when a very famous architect went to Stonehenge called Inigo Jones, he made fantastic buildings like the Banqueting Hall in London. I mean, he's got houses built in London designed by him. He was one of the first to dig at the centre of Stonehenge on behalf of the King James I of England, also King James VI of Scotland. And under the guise as well of a company with the Duke of Buckingham, who was the king's boyfriend. He was married to the Queen Anne of Denmark, but he kept company with the dashingly handsome Duke of Buckingham, is fact. Now, the king wanted at that time one of the stones of Stonehenge called the Great Trilithon. It stood today upright, but if you go back a couple of centuries, it was leaning. And so you could have taken that stone out of the ground. And the king wanted that stone, and Buckingham definitely wanted to buy it from the landowner, but the landowner refused, thankfully so. But Inigo Jones and the Duke of Buckingham claimed that there was 2 altar stones. Not just one that all of the archaeologists show you. In fact, up until the 1930s, archaeologists were looking for that stone. And one of the Cunningtons have had a long line in archaeology going back to the 1800s. And at that time in the 1930s, you had William Cunnington Jr., and he wrote letters because Inigo Jones and Buckingham told everybody where they took the second altar stone. They carted it away to St. James's Palace in London. Now, St. James's Palace was far greater then than Buckingham Palace. Nobody lived at Buckingham Palace then. It was yet to be done. Everyone lived at St. James's Palace. So I think they took the second altar stone, which was being looked for in the 1930s, but the royal door was closed on those archaeologists, and nobody else is asked since that time, well, where is the second altar stone? Except for me. And I'm saying now, where is the second altar stone? Well, it was carted away to St. James's Palace. Well, is it there? And if it is, just like the archaeologist said in the 1930s, then, dearest royal family, put it back.
Hopefully, if they're listening, they will put it back.
They should be, Paul. They should be.
Yeah, exactly. I must say hello to Jude and also hello to Jordan. Now, in your book, it seems like certain people doing archaeological excavations, are better than others. You do mention, and I have heard you mention it before, maybe a long-skulled priestess from Salisbury Plain around that way, or Neolithic queen. Now, you mentioned there was a archaeologist that was very respectful and put it back, William Cullington. But then Dr. John Thornham was less sympathetic. If you can say about your experiences, and unfortunately what is very important at this site is just in a box somewhere, but you fortunately have spent time with the Queen. So I think it's very important that, you know, and you properly honour her as well, that she gets a good mention tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, my whole question, like I said at the beginning, was who built these ancient sites? Why? And I think I can come up with an answer for that, and when. They were the three fundamental questions, and who came up. It was in 2015, some time ago now, that I was investigating long barrows in the Avebury environs and the Stonehenge environs. And I was led to a place called Tilsbury, which is on the outskirts of the Salisbury Plain, and it was the largest long barrow in Northwest Europe. And I had to find out who was there. And if you go to places like West Kennet Long Barrow, there's up to 36 people buried in those chambers there. And then if you go to Tinkins Wood in Wales, there was up to 100 people buried. So I thought, wow, I've hit the jackpot here when I find out who's in the largest barrow. But it wasn't communal like all the other long barrows. Stonehenge is very different, and it was raised for one person and one person alone. And I wanted to discover who that was, and it was a woman. And that took me to Cambridge University, where I photographed her, and then I realized she had a long skull coming out this way, not like the Paracas Peruvian cone heads. They come out as a long skull, literally, and that was who the ancestors were. And back then, when I wrote my first book, The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge, I didn't have the body dimensions. I just had the skull dimensions. Eventually, I put the body together, so to speak. And what I noticed was their faces were very narrow, okay, like children. So they were only that wide, okay, with a long skull. I've got a makeshift one I can show you in a minute. It's a bit Heath Robinson, because I'm not very artistic, but it will express the point. And they also, in the reports by anthropologists, were saying their ears were placed further back. So they would have looked almost kind of maybe mythical, like the Fae or Pixies. I'm not saying they were the Fae or Pixies, but I'm saying they could be a trace memory of them in these people. And then the reports kept saying their inner ear bones were different. So I gave a report to a doctor I know. She's a wonderful angel that works in A&E in London. So she is flat out all of the time. And, I could not do her job. God love her and God love all of those staff. She read the report and she said, Maria, this is impossible. They would be hearing differently. And I said to her, well, what if it's right? They're saying it in all of the reports. And then I think they could maybe hear different tones. But I've got a bit of a makeshift skull here today. It's a bit like Blue Peter, tape and sellotape. But that's the size of the skull against mine. And that's the size of it like that. So though they're long, they're very small and narrow. You see what I mean? Compared to an average size face. And maybe they did hear things differently. Maybe they heard the frequencies of the earth. Maybe they heard the music of the earth, the sounds coming out of stones. And their body, even though they were small, they're about women 4'9", men 5'4" tops. Their elongated skulls were smaller heads to their body proportions. What do I mean by that? My skull is 1/8 of, on average, a modern day skull is 1/8 of the body. Theirs were 1/10. So even though they were elongated, they were smaller heads to their body dimensions. So if one was by me now, I'd do a double take because they would look so different really to us. And the evidence is there. I have photographed for the book skull after skull after skull and femur bones to get the height. Once you have a femur bone, you can get the estimated height. So I would like to think that my journey started with this Neolithic woman, that she must have been very much revered, a high priestess, a high queen, and she was placed in that long barrow, and all of the people around her were long skulled, like at Avebury. They were long skulled as well. So our hidden history, that's why I call it the secret history of Stonehenge. I challenged the model, but I don't just say, believe me. Because why would anyone do that? I like to present evidence and saying, this is the skull, you look at it, that's long skulled. And like I say, the evidence is out there if you know where to look, and you can tap on doors and have those doors opened, hopefully, for researchers now and in the future.
Absolutely. Must say hello to Kathy and Lindsay. I hope you're having a very pleasant evening. Now, because you actually spent some time with her, you actually, I would say, got a download or like the sense that this High Queen would like to be back buried and respected where she should be. Have you actually heard any more about, if anything's going to happen, or is it just very sad that this skull's just hidden away for people not to see and how important it is?
Yeah, I mean, she's in a box at Cambridge, and she's not going to go anywhere. But I really did intuitively, when I was around her, feel that she longed for the Salisbury play. And it was actually quite sad. And the curator left the room, and I intuitively just put my hand close to her throat chakra. You can't touch an ancient skull. Even though you're gloved up, you might transfer DNA and things. So you're in a controlled environment. Okay. So I was very careful, and I put my hand over her throat chakra and said, I'll be your voice if you'll let me. And then I put my hand close to her third eye and said, allow me to see into your culture. Then I went along her long skull, and I thought I felt a kind of two different points, like two different crown chakras that may have been associated with that long lost civilization. I think, when you have a completely different body anatomy, then maybe you have completely different chakra system as well that shouldn't be ruled out. We're not all the same makeup, but my real sense was that to bring her voice back and to talk about her long lost people that were buried around Stonehenge, and they were shamans as well. I mean, archaeologists will say, oh, there's no artifacts found in long barrows. Well, that's simply not true. They were buried with incense pots. They were buried with kind of items to chop herbs with, and antlers. Now, the thing about antlers in a long barrow, archaeologists will say, oh, they were there because they dug out the chalk with it. You try and dig out 900 feet in diameter Stonehenge with an antler. I'd like to see the professors doing that one. But what they found under a microscope with these antlers, that they weren't used. In fact, they were polished. And they were probably worn as a headdress. So to say everything antler that you find at an ancient site to dig out chalk is missing the point. And that's why some have challenged that model and said, let's look at these under a microscope, and they are polished and they're not worn.
You did mention shamans. Now, I know the long skulled people, a shaman would be identified because their skull would be covered in green malachite. I find that really interesting. If you can explain more about that.
Yes, there was one skull found in Wiltshire, Wessex, a place called Alfred's Castle, which is an Iron Age site, which is probably from about 750 BC up until the Roman invasion. That was the time of the Iron Age and the Druids. And what was found with this skull and some Neolithic skulls in this neck of the woods and in Gloucestershire, your neck of the woods, was that they were covered in green malachite. And it was believed, and it's still believed, that they had healing houses at Alfred's Castle in Wiltshire. And so that they may have been in their own houses, in healing places. We'd call them hospitals today, surgeries today. And I think that's what they were doing. And they were honored by having their skulls treated a bit differently to other skulls as well. And some of the finest barrows have been in Gloucestershire. I mean, it's a bit ruinous today, but you've got Rodmartin, or Windmill Hill Tump, as it's sometimes called, and that had a big false entrance like Bellasnap. That's been restored. So at Rodmartin, you had a false entrance, but at the side of the long barrow were two chambers that had spirit holes. Now, a spirit hole in a long barrow is, imagine a megalith cut like that with a hole in it. Yeah. And they're kind of very enigmatic. And there's very few, except for examples in Gloucestershire. You have 3 examples in Gloucestershire alone. So that barrow at Rodmartin would have been one of the most finest barrows in the area, with spirit holes.
Amazing. Thank you, Lindsay, for sharing it out. So yes, Lindsay said you have to visit Gloucestershire, and Maria's done some tours in Gloucestershire. That was really, really good. And Bellasnap is a really fine example of it being put together so you can actually see it pretty much in its entirety. But I must admit, it's something about Rodmartin. Maybe it's the spirit holes that I just find a really good energy and just lovely to be in that spot.
Absolutely, because it has what's called a branch spiral energy. That's where you get a kind of line coming like this and it meanders, and then you have spirals coming out of those. And the ancients used to look for those wonderful spirals, and they placed the chambers on those. If you see what I mean. The thing about Rodmartin as well, they were practicing surgery, Neolithic surgery there, and they had what's called a trepanned skull, and that's where in the Neolithic they would kind of drill a hole in your skull, and that was deemed for by archaeologists to release bad spirits from epilepsy, but it's much more complicated than that, and it's to do with their long skull. But some of the finest examples of trepanning come from Rodmartin. Now, if you go to Bellasnap, then Bellasnap had 2 very unusual skulls placed in the false entrance. That's right at the front, on north-south of the axis line. It goes north-south at Bellasnap. And one was a round skull placed right next door to a long skull. I've got those examples there. And in fact, at Bellasnap, when we go there today, and it is wonderful, it's great. I've been there for decades going there. But today we see it as the dry stone walling on those horns, as they're called, that crest shape by the false chamber. We see them as dry stone walling. But how the ancients had that at Bellasnap was grassed over. So that wasn't actually exposed like it is today. That was in its reconstruction phase.
The reconstruction seemed to like to have the stone wall around. I think one of the biggest examples of that is Newgrange. That is very different to what it should have looked like. Now, I was going to sort of say, and then we'll talk about some of your tours, particularly some in America as well. I was returning the long skulled people. You mentioned the king, so there was like a Neolithic king as well that it was found. Love to know a little bit more about that, please.
This is what I mean. Stonehenge, their long barrows are so different to Gloucestershire, Staffordshire, Avebury, Newgrange, because that's where you had a lot of people placed in communal long barrows. Around Stonehenge, they were for single people. And so quite often with the Neolithic King, which is at Winterbourne Stoke roundabout, that's where you can see it today. It's a part of a much wider Bronze Age and Neolithic burial ground. It's really very sacred space there. And he was found by himself as well. So we know that they have to be important people to go into these places. So I think he was a high king as well. And it was noticed that, he had very good teeth. They didn't have sweets or anything like that, in the Neolithic. And he must have been having a very good diet. That's what was the archaeologists point out. And he had, again, with him, tools around him. He was probably a high king. It's often been pointed out that, if you're in the priesthood as well, you are mixing with royalty. And that was probably the same at Stonehenge in both the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. There's a lot of evidence for that.
And Stonehenge and around that area, it's known for different burials, which we'll get into in a moment. But I think it'd be nice to bring in, because I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone. Well, it's only 45 minutes yet, but the hour that we've got together. Can you say about your tours, the workshops that you give, the courses, and how people can get in contact with you, and all the other wonderful things that you do?
Absolutely. I'll be doing Avebury this year, and Woodhenge. We'll be walking it as the labyrinth with the music of the earth. And if you go to the aveburyexperience.co.uk, then that will have all of my Dowsing workshops on there, where we look into great depth with the earth energies. And I'll be going to Glastonbury, because I know somebody said there we'll have to have these in Gloucester, and go to Glastonbury. And so I'll be holding one there where we'll be looking into what's called the magic squares of antiquity that the Templars encoded into Glastonbury, which is fascinating. But I've also got free events as well. And I've got free talks at a book launch on March the 23rd. I've got them on Zoom as well. So all you have to do to join in with one of those is, and there's going to be a lot of questions being asked as well, then go to the Avebury Experience again, and the events page. And all you have to do if you want to get a join on Zoom is just click the Zoom link. It's that simple. Or come along. I'm at the Crop Circle Exhibition Centre. I know the owner there, Bonnie Klenkenberg, and I'll be doing some talks there and book launches there. And if you want to take Dowsing to a professional level, then go to my teaching platform, which is esotericcollege.com, and I have professional Dowsing courses and many other courses besides. But that's being held in July as well. So lots to do. And I spoke earlier about the night of the high moon. We're going to start celebrating that when the moon comes into alignment with the stones, because I've calculated every single stone at Avebury that's in alignment to the night of the high moon, where we can start to celebrate the energies, do some energy work on ourselves to link us up to the divine feminine of the moon and the synchronized energies of Gaia, Mother Earth.
I'm getting a couple of things coming through now, and also the books. You can get all of Maria's books, because you've written quite a few books now, haven't you, Maria? And I was going to, they're right the opposite side. the room. I was going to show the ones that I had so far, so I do apologise for that. But they're very excellent books to read. So I recommend you can go on Maria's website and get them from that. I'd recommend going through Maria's website rather than going through Amazon, so you can get them directly from Maria. We've got Pat saying, have you ever led a spiral dance?
No, I haven't led a spiral dance, but I've led the labyrinth walk there, which, you know, some people kind of, you know, dance along to. So, yeah, no, I haven't personally, but I'm very open to how people want to experience things at different ancient sites. It's not one shoe fits all, you know. So, yes, that would be lovely. I think walking it is a labyrinth as well. When we go into any labyrinth, whether it's in Chartres Cathedral or wherever, it's about going into yourself, going really very deeply into yourself when you arrive at the center. And as you come back out, it's about bringing those qualities out. So when we go into the labyrinth, sometimes it's good to have an intent there, whether you dance, whether you walk, whether you drum. I think that can sometimes help some people.
And I must say to Lindsay as well, I have put, but I will share them out again, most definitely. But in the description of this video, both on Facebook and YouTube, are links to Maria's website and her YouTube channel as well.
Thank you.
I'd love to do shamanic drumming at Woodhenge. I'm sure it would feel different compared to the woods near the stones. Very interesting talk this evening. Thank you, Karen. Anything you want to add to that at all?
Well, I think that's right. I think, you know, once you're in the sacred space with the earth energies and with the music of the earth and all the things that we've discussed, it's not just one thing. And then you add drumming on that. And they found flutes around Stonehenge in some of the burials as well. And what I did notice from one of the burial accounts there was runestones. I mean, we're led to believe that the Vikings introduced the runestones and the Saxons, as it were, but no, that you have the identical runestones that you have in the Viking rune divination system, if you will. And I found those at Stonehenge. They were carved out, and people used to wear them as well in pendants. So again, question history. Well, if you say that they're Viking, yes, the Vikings used them, but why are they identical at Stonehenge? And again, I show you the artifacts and say, this is that artifact. This is a Germanic rune. This is a Viking rune. Well, look, they're the same. It's fascinating because I think that they were doing divination. They were doing oracles and divination at Stonehenge for sure, because of these artifacts found very close by.
And artist Lana's here. Hello, Lana. Lovely to have you here. One of the things I was going to mention, which I just said before, asking you to give a mention to your books, your tools, etc., was the burial positions at Stonehenge are very different compared to the other sites. If you can explain the differences and why they are buried that way, or your knowledge to why they are.
Yeah, people were buried differently depending on your status, so to speak. So if you were a high priest, a high priestess, a shaman, then you would have what's called a flat burial. Well, how we do it today, basically, you know, you're led down and you're at one angle. But the other burials were what's called flexed, and that's where they took the skeleton and put them into the fetal position, tied them. And that was very common during the Bronze Age. But at Rodmarten, because we mentioned that because some of you guys may be like Paul from Goddard, you had them in the sitting position, staring out of those burial chambers as if they're acting guardians. And the interesting thing is that they had a standard kit with them, like a medicine bag, the high priests of Stonehenge, and they had these beautiful incense pots. They're on display at places like Salisbury Museum and Devizes Museum, which is called Wiltshire Museum, but it's actually in Devizes. And if you imagine a bit like a church censer where you're swinging it, it had two holes at the top, very beautifully done, and it was full of opiates. So they were getting into a different consciousness within Stonehenge, and maybe coming out with these oracles. The interesting thing about my dowsing legacy is how you can program stone, or how you can encourage stone to do something. I don't really like the word programming, but that's how the old dowsers spoke about it. And then if you can program it in a certain way, you can enhance its acoustic properties. And this was looked at by the Dragon Project going back to the 70s and the 80s. And they noticed that if you can kind of chisel in, and all of the stones at Stonehenge were dressed, they were pounded again and again and again. And if you put energy in and thought forms behind that, it's almost like you can program sarsen. How can you program sarsen? Because it has the same qualities as a semiconductor, a microchip made at Silicon Valley. There's no difference between the inside of a standing stone and the inside of a modern day microchip. They're very, very similar in how they can conduct. So I think they could conduct certain rites and ceremonies, and even maybe have acoustic properties coming from the standing stones. If you do have a different ear placement and ears, maybe you could hear that.
Incredible stuff. Also, as well, you mention in your books about where the long stole priestess came from, but that some of these burial mounds are now taken over by the military, and one's covered over. And they say it's moles, I believe, if I remember that right from the book. Why are they kind of covering up these sites which were meant really for us to visit and respect?
Absolutely. So let's say you've got a long, they wouldn't do this to West Kennet because that's a tourist site. They wouldn't do that to Wayland Smithy. If you imagine you've got the long mound, that's what a long barrow is. And on the Salisbury Plain, on military, I liken it to Area 51 in Nevada, because it's a no-go areas for civilians. You can't access certain parts of it where all the interesting things happen. So join your own dots there. So you've got this long mound, and they were like that for year after year after year. Believe me, I've been doing this for a long time. And what they've done recently is encage them like in a Faraday cage with all of this really strong fencing. You know, like the fencing you get at schools with those kind of diamond shapes. I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure everybody's understanding what I'm trying to describe. That's now all over the mounds. And once you put something in a Faraday cage, no matter what that is, it can stop its energetic qualities. Not 100%, but it can do that as well. So I think the Area 51, which is our Salisbury Plain, does have unusual activity there. It has paranormal activity there that's been reported to me time and again. And it has the most interesting barrows with some very strange burials. One that I liken to a hybrid, the Star Child, which was found by Lloyd Pye in America. Well, the skull was actually given to him. It came from Mexico, and it was just, he showed it to the world. He claimed it was a hybrid between an alien and a human being, and its eyes are like here, so on the top of the head, and its skull quality is different. Well, when I was investigating Stonehenge, what did I find? The exact description of that skull of a star child, if indeed that's true. Without DNA testing, you can't really tell. But what the early archaeologists pointed out, it had a tail, and it shocked them so much that they instantly reburied it. It's still there in the landscape. It's back in the barrow in situ. And I would really like some DNA testing done to see what it is. I'm very open-minded. You know, I don't know what that skull is or its past, but I do know it was very unusual.
Yeah, it's. I think that's good as well. Is that to be open-minded enough, not to just put this is my theory and this is what I stick to. But that's what I find with things that I do, is just to keep that good open-mindedness. I can't believe how quickly this time's going. So I'm just going to just finish off with just a few questions, really. First of all, please say mentions to your website and how people can get hold of you again. First of the final questions.
Okay, it's the aveburyexperience.co.uk. I like in the Avebury Stones, the Avebury Experience.co.uk. Or my teaching platform is esotericcollege.com. And any course that you do with me could be taken to diploma level. It's fully affiliated to the Association of Distant Learning Colleges. So that's something that you can do. It's optional. So yes, do visit the site rather than go on Amazon. Amazon are now saying that it's going to take months to stock my book. That's just not true. If you complain against Amazon, then you are targeted.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So so do go to Maria directly. So I'm going to read this out. Thank you so much for your wonderful stories and history. You explained my understanding of these wonderful sites. Can't wait to experience the music of the Stones someday. Thank you, Cowabunga. We have here, great live. Thank you, Paul and Maria.
Thank you.
Can you come back, Maria? Oh, I hope so, because we've literally only just scratched the surface, and there's so much in your book and other books and all the research we've done. So if you're happy to do that at some point in the future, I'd love to have you back.
Absolutely. So it's a lovely crowd here, and you've all uplifted me with your really kind responses, because in this day and age you can have the good, the bad, and the trolls, and it's great company. So thank you for listening as well. And I would always say and I do say to everybody, just because somebody said something and investigated it, believe me, those ancient sites have stories millennia old that they still want to tell, and they choose people to tell it. So go there, and you never know what history or what belief or what inspiration that you'll get, or discoveries to be made.
I like that very much. Fascinating topic and talk tonight. Thank you, Lorna. So what I was going to sort of ask you, one, I kind of finish all my interviews with this, and I've got one more question as well after that. Is there anything I haven't asked you? And I know I've just scratched the surface of your new book and the other work that you've done. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you feel you'd really like to say?
I think I've been in good company. And what I really do feel about the ancient sites is they are so wonderful, Paul. When you look at Stonehenge and Avebury, and I've been to the pyramids, just remember they're a human story. And there's men and women and children of the past that we can contact and get in touch with just as much as the energies of the stone and the energies of Gaia.
Wonderful. Couple more things before I mention the final question. Thank you so much. I'm itching to get back to Stonehenge and read your books. Very interesting. Anna says, very insightful. Thank you. Let's have a look at this one. Cowabunga, and you lifted us with your own energy. Yeah, absolutely. What a lovely thing to say. And got goosebumps there, Maria. Absolutely. So there might be somebody drawn to this that is just getting into these wonderful ancient sites we have, the burial mounds, whatever they might be, the standing stones. If somebody that has just heard this and thought, I'd like to go and visit one now, and never done any dowsing, never picked up on the energies, instead of it just being turn up to the site, oh, that's very nice and interesting, and read the plaque that's put up, what can somebody do as a beginner to maybe tune into the history of the place?
Absolutely. Well, I'm also a druid as well. So the first thing I would say to anyone really is, before you go into a site, ask permission of the ancestors, the spirit of place, and the guardian. Okay. Now, if you just stand with your feet quite firm on the ground and you get a yes, you can really interact with the site. You'll feel a little bit of an energy pull you forward or to the side or maybe to the back. Those with a humble heart always get granted anyway, to be fair. And so we can...
Oh, I hope this is all right.
We can ask our way into... And Sorry? Yes, I always tell an ancient site what I'm going to do as well. So it knows what I'm going to do. If I'm going to do dowsing, I tell it that.
Excellent. Now you'll find you just had a little glitch just for a second there. So I was just a little concerned that that we were going to lose you for a second, but it was okay. Thank you so much, Maria. I will definitely be inviting you back at some point, because you're such a fountain of knowledge, so interesting, and people that have been watching tonight have absolutely loved it, I can tell. And thank you so much for giving me this time tonight as well.
You're more than welcome. You're a lovely bunch, and I'll see you at the book launch.
Indeed.